Welcome. Good evening. Tonight, we're still doing the series on the Orthodox Jews in Galicia in the modern era, 1772 to 1942. As I've tried to explain, Galicia didn't exist except other in that period. Tonight is 5 out of 6, fifth lecture. The title is Change, We Don't Change. The Crisis of Orthodox Judaism in Galicia in the fin de Siecle, which of course means the 20, 30 years or so before World War I. Okay? Now, as you see, tonight's talk is being sponsored by the Gardens, the two boys, my students, in honor of their grandfather, who was the Reb Shimon Sofer we talked about the other day, okay, from Mrs. Garden. Now, that's yichus. Now, here we go. As we've seen, Galicia had one of the largest populations, more than 800, close to 1 million. And in a small area, relatively, that's a lot of people. And I'm not counting the ones who moved to America, England, Vienna, a ton of moved to Vienna. That's 800, 900,000 in addition to the ones who left. Galicia was not immune to the waves of, shall we call it, non-orthodoxy that swept over Eastern European Jewry in the 19th century. There was constant hemorrhaging. So if you want to know what it was like, as far as from Jews are concerned, just get used to the idea that every decade it gets worse. You lose more and more people. And they couldn't figure out how to stop the air from leaking from the balloon. And that's the way it went. You understand? It's what happened. You got to remember also, the economy was terrible, as I said before. So it's not like there could arise a large, prosperous, from middle class as you had in America today. We're in a nice shul. It's air conditioned. In Baltimore, you have enough people that they can support a couple of day schools, if not more. They can support some kosher restaurants. They can support 7 Mile Market, etc. You need a mikvah. We can raise the money. You have a middle class that's doing well, and some are doing better than well. And that's the way it had been in the old kingdom of Poland. Now, just like in Baltimore, you got your poor, you got the people that cannot afford to give more than a nickel. There was always a ton of people like that. There's always going to be a ton of people like that. But I'm talking about, in addition to those people, you have people that can give more than a nickel, and some can give a lot more than a nickel. That wasn't the case so much in Galicia, you see, where the economy, because of the Austrian misrule, I don't think they did it on purpose, although that's a big debate among Polish and Ukrainian historians today. That'll take us too far afield. Did the Austrians do it on purpose? But the bottom line is, as we would say today, weren't a lot of jobs around, weren't good jobs. There's always the exceptions. There were enterprising individuals and guys who set up business, this, that, and the other. You always got those. And you'll have your small share millionaires and so forth. But overall, broadly speaking, it was a pretty poverty situation, okay? And by the way, when I say poverty, please do remember, no welfare, no Social Security, no unemployment insurance, none of that existed. Okay? So, also, therefore, remember that religious Judaism, in and of itself, did not have a solution for poverty and for starvation. All you can say was you pray harder. You understand? Like Rabbi Hertzberg would say, you pray harder for yourself, but the other person you got to do something for. Worry about your ruchnius, but worry about the other person's gashmius. Don't tell somebody you're starving, go pray harder. You see? And so, what is the solution? This is why old-fashioned, I don't want to use the word orthodoxy because historians use it in a different way, as you'll see in a minute. Shall I use the word old-fashioned traditionalist Judaism? It was in crisis because it didn't supply an answer for a lot of people to the existential problems that they had in life. Now, the history of Judaism, especially when we use the term Orthodox Judaism, which is a 19th century term, in Galicia, in the 19th, early 20th century, is an unusual one. It is different than the history of what we call Orthodox Judaism in, say, Germany or Hungary or Lithuania, on the one hand, in the 19th century. On the other hand, it's also different than, let's say, Bohemia, France, Western Europe, and other anemic centers of Jewish life on the other. Galicia is its own thing. Now, the history of Judaism Well, let me say this. Herein lies a tale, which fascinatingly reflects the strange fate of the concept of Klal Yisrael in the modern era. Today, we don't have Klal Yisrael except as an ideal. Take Baltimore, Maryland, for example. You got at least two sets of Jews, one doesn't talk to the other. That's how it goes. Everybody lives their lives. So basically, it's what we call in America amicable divorce. You know, she lives in Park Heights, he lives in Greenspring, and they live completely separate lives. So you have, in Baltimore, you have the Orthodox community that's all cooking and then does its own thing. Then you have the non-Orthodox community, and they live elsewhere and do their own thing. There's never anything connected with the two. I guess if there's a threat of anti-Semitism, everybody would feel bad. But the truth of the matter is each would point the finger at the other and say, you're the cause of the anti-Semitism. You see? So that is not the Jewish ideal. It emerged as a Jewish reality in the modern era. I've made this point many times. The theory, the model of Klal Yisrael is that there's something spiritually supremely important to God, that the Jews should all hang together, okay? Regardless of differences between them, and that this often surprises people. I know whenever I say on a podcast, I always get blowback, but they just don't know what they're talking about. And that is, in classic Judaism, God prefers a mixed community than to a community where everybody's from. This is the model of the Ketores, and this is the model we're all familiar with of the Lulav and the Esther, Gadas and Meravas. There are mitzvahs in the Torah, and they're there to reflect what I said. Now, the reason I get blowback is we don't live this kind of life anymore. And so, you have an Orthodox community where everybody's like this, you have another one where everybody's like that, and it's kind of broken apart. So the Lulav is over here, the Esther is over there, the Hadassah in the third place, and so forth. But if you go by classic Judaism, Chabur Ephraim Atzam Hanachlo, the generation of Acha was supposed to be great, because even though we were worshiping idols, but all the Jews hung together. That's a chazal. So this was a classic ideal. The problem, which is reflected, let's go to the first one. Yeah. If you read the Mesilas Yesharim, Wax is eloquent about this. The Mesilas Yesharim, of course, was written around the year 1720, before the modern era, in Italy. And he was just giving voice to what was normative Judaism in his time and for many centuries previous to that. Okay? Now, Luzzatto, the problem it was that the theory of Klal Yisrael kind of presupposes a certain hierarchy in the Jewish community. Sociologically, Klal Yisrael was more weighted to the right in the earlier centuries, as the Mesilas Yesharim talks about. The only thing is, you need a left to act as a kind of a balancing to the right, so the right shouldn't go off the deep end to the right, so to speak. The left acted as a moderating influence on the pietistic extremes of the hard right, and we have a rule in the Gemara, very famous, Ein gozin gzeira al tzibur em kiyo rova tzibur chol lambaba, that the Sanhedrin cannot pass a law, even if they think it's the right law, if the majority of the community can't handle it. They can't pass this law. So that means in plain English that the ideal community was supposed to be something along the following lines. Imagine a spectrum with the right, middle, and left. Let's say the right are the real, and they go lifnim ashur sadin. Okay, lifnim, they go beyond what the law requires. And they like to do it. That's great. On the other extreme, you have the people that don't keep anything. You see? They live the life of reprobates. Oh my goodness, you don't want to catch them on a Tuesday night. And the middle is the middle, okay? And the only difference goes as follows. The difference is that those who are acting that way don't claim to be right. They just claim to be, that's who they are humanly. You understand? And they say like this, really, the real Jewish thing is those guys over there. As long as that gets together, the ones in the middle are floaters. And so, in an old-fashioned community of long ago, Ashkenaz or Sephardi, the job of the rabbi is to give everybody hell, hoping that it'll move some of the people in the middle a little more this way, and maybe a few people on the hard left, an inch or two this way. But even if they stay all the way over there, let's face it, as I always point out, when the Warsaw Ghetto needed weapons, they had to go to the gangsters. You understand? There's a time and a place you need people of all sorts. The Hasidic always tell it in the form of a Hasidic tale, all these ideas. And there was a famous Hasidic Rebbe, I believe Saris, who was asked, how come you have so many criminals among your followers and things like that? Pickpockets and who knows ever. And he basically said, when I get to the pearly gates, they might not let me in, so I'm going to need help from people who know how to jimmy the door open and get me in under the wire. You understand? People who know how to break in. That's a Hasidic way of saying the point that I just made. And there are many tales like this in the Gemara and the rabbinic literature and elsewhere. The one that comes to mind as I'm standing here, I forget who was in the Gemara, Chagig or whoever. Some rabbi asked Eliyahu Navi, says, show me my place in the world to come. I want to see my seat in Gan Eden. And who's sitting next to me? Tell me who's sitting next to me for eternity. And they said, this and this guy. Oh, I got to find out who he is. He goes and finally locates the guy. The guy doesn't look religious at all. He said, do you ever go to shul? Do you keep kosher? Nothing. Where do you work? He works in a house of ill fame. Okay? You're going to be next to me, Gan Eden? Do you ever go to shul Yom Kippur or something like that? Nope. What do you do in your job? I arrange the curtains, I play the piano, and so forth. This is the person next to me. Do you do anything good? He said, nope. The only thing I do is if I see a Jewish girl, I get her the heck out of there. You see, that's telling the same idea in a Godic story, right? Now, the problem is, in the modern era, this broke down because the left didn't say like this, we're just sinners. They said, we're right, and those guys are wrong. And it became ideologically arguing over the definition of Jewish. And then the model didn't work anymore. This is what I mean when I say that in the 19th century, the size and the power of the left increased, both qualitatively as well as quantitatively, to the point where it came to dominate and even destroy the right, which had the effect of weakening Yiddishkeit for all due to the left's traditional non-engagement with Limud HaTorah and its norms. So, for example, you take, Germany, the rise of, shall we say, the Reform movement in the 19th century. They didn't say, listen, I have a shul like we call today. Look, they drive. That's how it goes. They don't keep kosher, but, we're trying to keep some Judaism going. No, it said like this. There's no law of kosher. The Bible's a bunch of baloney. This is the way Judaism should be defined. It's, you're redefining terms. So then there was no common language, and then the whole thing broke apart. And basically, Humpty Dumpty, no one's able to put it together again down to the year 2022. Okay? So this is the great tragedy of Jewish life in the modern era, and it hit everywhere, including Galicia, as we shall see. Okay? Now, the result is, because in other words, it didn't work anymore. The result was, wherever you had a united community, which ought to be the ideal, in effect, it retarded, it blocked even, any overall movement towards the intensification of Judaism. So there were many, many places, as I said before, that were anemic. France, England, Italy, many places in Germany, elsewhere. And the reason, I'll use American language, right? Even though I'm talking about earlier. Suppose you had a show like you said in Baltimore 100 years ago, 80, 70 years ago, without naming names. And the world I grew up in, and you probably did, some of you. Let's say it's an Orthodox shul. But nobody keeps anything, except a very small number. Those people who are in the majority are going to be very turned off if somebody tries to move anything to the right. They'll freak out. You understand? You're Meshuggah from, you're a fanatic, you're this, that, and the other. And so anybody who's a rabbi wants to hold his job, or you don't want to have a mass exit membership, they're always going to say, tamp it down, take it easy, don't push things too far. So you'll never get any kind of intensification of Judaism whatsoever, because the weight of the numbers is going to block that. You see? That's the old-fashioned joke, which is a bitter joke of yesteryear that we've all heard. Rabbi, don't give a speech about Shabbos and Kashrus. Talk about Judaism. And that has to do, that's the old, but it's a famous old line. It reflects the fact that once upon a time, it was true. If you bring up Taras Mishpacha, people are going to leave. If you make too much trouble about driving, they're going to leave. You see? And so that means already that the Klal Yisrael, the idea of a united group, is becoming counterproductive. It's not what it's supposed to be. It's not that you're moving people even a little bit this way, but the opposite. The great majority is moving things the other way and preventing the kids that could be from being anything. Again, I'm just spouting over here. A couple years ago, I won't say the whole story, I'll say part of it. I was at a conference in Hopkins, and I sat, a very nice fellow, I won't say the name. He's a philosophy professor in Columbia. And that week, and we were talking this and that and the other, and the next day I said, son of a gun, I saw in the forward, he had an article, and the article went like this: I didn't leave conservative Judaism left me. Now why? He said, I come from a family where they took everything very seriously. They were conservative. He said, I took everything seriously, and we wanted Shabbat and this, that, and the other, and everybody's making fun of me. Finally, I said, I don't need this, and I'm going to move, to a modern Orthodox synagogue in Upper Side Manhattan. The rest of the story I won't go into. But that's an idea in which you see the weight, the streaming is in the quote-unquote the wrong direction. All right? Now, and in the modern era, if you didn't have an intensification of Judaism, well, such intensification was necessary for the survival of Judaism as a corrective to the excessive westernization pressures of the megatrends of modernity. This is a fact. Again, we all know this. Maybe you don't use those words, but that's what it boils down to. So whenever Kehillas in the 19th century were inclusive and included everybody, like the United Synagogue in England or something like that, the net effect was the stifling of anything too religious, too Meshuggah from, or anything like that. The results, especially with the stifling of any efficient chinuch, were devastating. Why did they ever set up day schools in any of these communities, all the rest? Oh, you don't want too religious? We don't want that. And so the Klal Yisrael concept was counterproductive. As I said before, this happened in Baltimore, Maryland, if you're old enough. The only solution that developed in the 19th century was to abandon the Klal Yisrael idea and create some kind of separatist society with the hope that one day Klal Yisrael will be restored, the pious hope. And these are the famous names in the 19th century that you hear about, or 20th century. In Germany, Hungary, the Hasidim, the yeshivas, what do they all have in common? Breaking away from everybody else, setting up your own little tent. You see? A separatist tent. And in my tent, in my shul, might only be 10 people. In my shul, we're going to do it the right way. In my yeshiva, we're going to maybe only have 100 guys. We're going to do it the right way. And the rest of society can go to the devil because they're going that way anyway. I can't stop them. That's the theory. No, that's the theory. But creating such separate societies within existing kehilos was not so easy because it went, in the 19th century, against deeply rooted sentiments of Klal Yisrael, as Samson Raphael Hirsch discovered. I think many people know the story of Samson Raphael Hirsch when he insisted that all the members of his community resign from the official kehillah, to which they had been members of for generations, and join his instead of having membership in both. That means it's not the same cemetery anymore, it's not the same this. They don't want to do it. The only people he could convince were the people in his family and the people who were on the payroll. Yes, and the chazan and so forth. They don't want to do it. Now, they were religious, they went to his shul, they followed his stuff, but that part they couldn't do because it's going against the idea of Klal Yisrael. What I'm saying today, people, if I told this to my children's generation, younger generation, or even people of my generation, they wouldn't even know I'm talking about. How can you be part of it? I'm from, what's the issue? Because the fact of the matter is, today, in our lifetime, the Jewish people become totally fractionated around the world. As I said before, there are 2 Baltimores, there's 2 New Yorks, there's two Israels. It's 2 Israels. And so there you have it. Now, the thing is, it usually required, in the 19th century, some radical or shocking discontinuity to generate a viable separatist dynamic. So things just went along as they always did with nothing out of the ordinary. It just went into death. It just decayed. On the other hand, if somebody ever pushed a button or went something radical, let's say in a left-wing direction, that often had the effect of sparking a counter-reaction, which turned out to be the beginning of a separatist and vibrant orthodoxy. Now, if we survey, by the way, the USA is a perfect example. If you know a little bit of American history, 19th century, you'll know what I'm talking about when I say the Treifa banquet. if that means anything, right? Or the Pittsburgh Platform. This is when the Reform movement really went far down the road, and they had official trafe banquet with the shellfish and all that, 1883. And in 1885, they passed what they call Pittsburgh Platform, in which they said, we don't believe in nothing. And that created conservative Judaism, right? That was the beginning of conservative Judaism. So in other words, those guys who weren't Meshuggah from, but they were really turned off by the fact you're publicly, dissing on kashrus, you're publicly saying you don't believe in the Torah. You see what I'm saying? So there was a radical discontinuity. By the way, that was a mistake of the Reform movement. They were going very successful. They should have kept low profile, and they take over everybody. But they pushed it. You can't help it. The nature of a dynamic is there are always people who spearhead a dynamic, and they always want to really, push it. It's interesting. So if we survey historically a map of the 19th century Europe, as you see over here, right, 19th century Europe, we'll see a pattern of a decadence of traditionalism, which only was transformed into an energetic orthodoxy when there occurred a challenge from a vigorous heterodoxy, such as a movement for Reform Judaism or a movement to redefine it in atheistical terms. So why did there pop up Hirsch and people like that in Germany? Because the left pushed it so far that they reinvented Judaism. The Reform movement says like this: there are no such things as laws within Judaism. That's pretty interesting. There are no halachas. I mean, for thousands of years, Judaism defined itself as having a lot of laws. And then the Reform movement said, well, it's just a big mistake. It was just a big mistake. So that was like such a, so it pushed the other direction, and there arose what they called the Neo-Orthodox, the term derech eretz. In Hungary, again, there was something called the rise of the Neolog movement, I would call today conservative Judaism, left-wing conservative Judaism, which, again, was based on the idea of historicism and the Bible isn't really the Bible and so forth. That was such a big shock that provoked the Hungarian ultra-Orthodoxy, you see, which is a product of the 19th century. America, I just told you about. These are very, in Eastern Europe, like over here, when you start to get not new denominations of Judaism, but secular Judaism, which basically says God doesn't exist. Now let's talk about Judaism. That's such a shock that led to the counter-reaction, what we call yeshivas, which become bastions of fundamentalism. And so usually it had to be something like this to provoke that. Okay? Otherwise, the sleeping giant would continue to sleep. Now, as I said, it happened in America. Now, why am I going through all this? Because in Galicia, it didn't happen. Right? In Galicia, a reform movement just never happened. Instead, people simply became lax. Old-fashioned way. Usually after they got rich or they got education. They're very Catholic. Galicia is the heart of Poland. It's a Catholic area, baby. I mean, Catholic. In the Catholic world, not everybody's religious. Not everybody goes to church. Not everybody all this stuff. But you're Catholic. You know what I'm saying? And if you got to get married, you're going to get married in a Catholic church. You're going to get buried, you're going to get buried in the Catholic way. You got your rituals, you're going to do it in the Catholic way. Even the Irish, gangster wants everything. The Italian mafia guy wants it done in the Catholic way. So that's happened more and more in Galicia. So they never really, any attempt, and there were a few, to set up an alternative form of Judaism, as opposed to a lax form of the existing Judaism, never happened, and therefore never stirred any energetic counteractivity on the part of the Frum. That's my analysis. Because traditionalism per se was never challenged, because there was no Neolog movement, as happened in Hungary, none of that developed in Galicia, there was no basis for the very religious, and you had a lot of very religious, Hasidim and whatever, to ostracize or separate themselves from the non-observant or the less observant. The result, especially in larger urban areas, was a situation like used to be in Baltimore 70, 80 years ago, with its non-from Orthodox shoulders of yesteryear, where the non-observant wings could really inhibit the growth of genuinely from kehillas. I'm talking about kehillas where everybody was actually Shomer Shabbos in the full sense of the word, instead of the partial and selective sense of the word. And so, once upon a time, like I said, here or across America, a place like that, when you had those old-fashioned type of synagogues, of which there were many, I think the only one left today, as far as I can think of offhand, is Bet Tefillah. I mean, viable. There may be a few small ones, a little bit. Bet Tefillah's always been its own, thing. It really inhibited the development of anything, I grew up, I'm sure you grew up in a place, people in shows say, oh, you're too religious, you're too this, you're too that. I got to dance to their tune. Why do I got to dance to your tune? You see? So this is what I'm talking about. Now, for this reason, by the mid-19th century, the larger Kehilas were more traditionalistic than piously religious, and the main demand of the richy riches was not to be criticized for the laxities in various areas. Now, this non-frum element steadily grew in the 19th century. And so, basically, don't talk about Shabbos, Kashrus, talk about Judaism. Okay? And I'm talking about big rabbis like even in Krakow and places like that. You have to just understand this how it was. Again, the countryside is always a little more different. It's more Hasidic. But everything about Hasidism was repugnant to the modernizers. Some modernizers simply abandoned any connection with Judaism, period. As I told you the other day, there were people who simply became Polish without converting. These are the misbolim, the assimilationists. And after 1868, as I said yesterday, when the Polacks were in charge, because they got charged of the state government, that's the culture you want to assimilate to. This guy you probably never heard of. He's one of the most famous modern Polish poets. There's a statue of him in Poland. He's Jewish, zero to do with Judaism. You understand? He was a great poet. I'm not Polish enough, but I know, I've read many times, his poetry in the modern era is considered very significant stuff. And I got nothing against it, but that just means like this. He worshipped at their shrine. See? He spent all of his time in Polish culture. Okay? So he's an assimilationist Jew. I forget exactly the story, but when the Holocaust came, he ran away. He got to America, and after the war, he went back to Poland, communist Poland. It's an interesting story. But the bottom line is like this. You have plenty of people like that in Galicia and other parts of Poland, in which they were Jewish. By that I mean they didn't convert, but their whole life was spent as goyim, if you follow what I mean. And anyway, you can always be sure these people's children or grandchildren will soon be out of the fold. You understand? By the time you get to the grandchildren, nobody's Jewish. On the other hand, there were many other modern Jews who certainly didn't like the Frummies and the Hasidim, but who wanted a vibrant Judaism that accommodated to their lifestyle. In other words, a traditionalism that corresponded to what I would call an easygoing Catholic culture. You see? The Catholics have that too. The trouble was, how exactly does one create a vibrant Jewish culture in the absence of frum frameworks? How do you create a culture that is attractive and compelling? Let's put it this way. They haven't been able to do it in America. They've not been able to do it in America. You don't see young people streaming to the synagogues. The Haskalah was there, but that's in Hebrew. Okay? So it can only be consumed by a few people who can read Hebrew. Read books and articles, things like that. So this culture they're seeking is a bourgeois culture. When I say bourgeois, businessmen, not university educated, practical, but they have a cultural side. And so the bourgeois nature of this new non-Haskalah vibrant culture, by definition, restricted its appeal to the bourgeoisie, which meant it couldn't interest their children if their children went to college and eventually joined the intelligentsia. Because then they want culture. And you ain't going to get it in Judaism, you'll get it in European culture. You understand? Why should somebody want to go to shul, hear a second-rate lecture, if they can go to university or a concert and hear a first-rate thing from some Geisha person? And anyway, the guy went to college, and now he knows Polish, or he knows German, or this and the other. You can get it at the better level. Okay? Now, so in other words, they didn't really succeed, by our standards today, in creating a vibrant Jewish culture in Galicia, 19th, early 20th century. The only truly exciting piece of modern Jewish culture was for people like me, not for people like you. That's the Wissenschaft des Judentums, meaning the historians who were educated in the universities of Krakow and Lemberg and wrote these classic books of Jewish history in Polish that are really very good, but boring to the layman. Right? These are famous names of yesteryear. This is, what do you call it? The guy on the left is Moses Shor, who was a very famous historian. He became the head of the Institute of Higher Jewish Studies in Warsaw after the First World War. And the guy on the right is Meir Balaban, maybe you've heard of him. I don't know. These are famous names of once upon a time. But by definition, I think as our audience proves here tonight, ain't that big of a crowd for academic culture. You see, it's going to speak to a few. So it's really, I don't want to underestimate what they did, and they weren't from, that's for sure, right? But as professors and that kind of stuff, they did a lot of very interesting sort of thing. But it's not a mass culture at all, okay? So, it's for the intellectuals and maybe for some prosperous bourgeois, but not for the public. We have this problem, as I said before, in America today. There's no vibrant, non-from Jewish culture out there, and that's why it's falling apart. Now, and all this was happening against the background, as we saw yesterday, of Polish and Ruthenian anti-Semitism, which actually should have been a spur, thank you, should have been a spur to increase, Jewish culture, Jewish engagement. Starting in the late 1890s, a new factor appeared, which got a little more of a kick. Now, from that Zionism, right? Which excited some in Galicia and would grow and grow until the Holocaust. Right? Tomorrow I'll talk about why Zionism grew and grew until the Holocaust. The whole story of Galicia, like the whole story of Eastern Europe, is a sad story because it comes to a sudden end. We all know that. Everybody gets killed. But until then, we're taking up until then. Now, in the beginning, Zionism always had two parts. There's political Zionism and the cultural Zionism. But it happens to be over here, the cultural Zionism hit Galicia first. Cultural Zionism is the desire to create a culture like you have in Israel today, which is a secular culture in some Jewish language. Doesn't have to be Hebrew. Turned out it was Hebrew in the end, but could have been Yiddish, could have been something else. But, it's got token to it. That big writer, A.P. Yoshua, died today. I mean, I don't read that stuff, but a lot of people do. There's something to it. You see? Theodor Herzl, by the way, was a political Zionist, did visit Galicia or Bukovina, there you go, to see the Sadiger Rebbe, who lived in a palace, right? That's when Herzl was in his phase where he first started Zionism. He basically discovered the wheel. Like, gee, the Jews have a land in Israel. Maybe we should go to Israel. Everybody knew it, but he said, let's do it. And in the beginning, he said like this: I can either go one of two routes. I can patchko the rest of my life trying to create a Zionist movement, deal with the Jews who are a pain in the neck, or I can go to two rooms. In this room is Rothschild and a couple guys like that. In this room is the Ger Rebbe, the Sadiger Rebbe like that. I say, listen, from you guys, I need a couple of billion. For you guys, tell your followers about 1 million or 2 to move to Palestine. Presto digito, you got a Jewish state. You see? The only problem, of course, is the millionaires told him where to go, and the Rebbes told him where to go. Well, because he was coming, he seemed like a nut. You see? There's the palace in Sadiger where he lived like a millionaire. He had a palace. Okay? This is famous, the Rishner. So, to tell you the truth, Herzl's main contact was Chartkova Rebbe, the one who became the second Chartkova Rebbe, the picture that we're all familiar with. Let's go to the next one. You've seen that picture on the left, right? So that's the second Chartkova Rebbe. When he was Prince of Wales, he wasn't the king yet, so he was negotiating, secretly. Let me put it this way. It is a possibility, not really, but it is a possibility the Zionists could have gone a different direction with a Hasidic backing, which would have been very interesting. Now, not really, because, this one is in Hodu and this one is in Kush, but you never know. And all I'm trying to say is like this. Herzl lived in Vienna. He was a member of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. To him, the Far East is Galicia. And you don't have to go to Russia or nothing like that. It's all part of the Austrian Empire. You get on a train and you're there. So it wasn't crazy for him, when he's talking about the Eastern European Jews and all the rest of it, primarily, once in his life went to Russia. Primarily, he's dealing with the Galicianos, right? And by the way, the Belzer Rebbe had masses. The Sadiger Rebbe had masses. I mean, if these guys, let's just pretend, Herzl wrote a famous book, What If, called Alta Neue Land, Old New Land. So I can write a book, What If, let's say Herzl and these guys made a shidduch. And then, in the late 19th century, if this Rebbe and everybody said, pack your bags and hit the road, move to Palestine, and we'll try to put some economy together over there. Let me put it this way, they wouldn't have been there for Hitler. Right? They wouldn't have been there. Like I say, I'm writing a novel. The point is, it wasn't successful in the long run. But political Zionism, anyway, never amounted to much in those years. It was a flash in the pan. Herzl made a big hoopla, and he did try But as we all know, it never happened. Actually, it had like a funny denouement, as everybody knows, because they offered him Uganda, right? Which, by the way, goes to show you the unbelievable nature of European imperialism. The British had so much land. This really happened. And they were sympathetic. And the British had so much land because he was basically saying like this, I'll take all the Jews out of here, move them somewhere else. They liked that idea. So the colonial secretary, Joseph Chamberlain, who was the father of Neville Chamberlain, Joseph Chamberlain, he said, I want to help you. And he called in his secretary and said, let me see the maps. What do we got? You know, like a guy going through his inventory. And he said, what about Uganda? You know, or which really was Kenya. So it didn't really pan out into anything, okay? Now, cultural Zionism did pan out into something because cultural Zionism, Yiddishism also, which was big, actually has in mind the creation of a vibrant Jewish culture. It's just not religious, that's all, okay? So this is the world of Echad Ha'am, in which you have quality Hebrew language material, equivalent, I mean, the hope is equivalent to what you find in any other European culture, okay? So you have art, literature, plays, drama, ceremonies, you know, and it'll speak to us because it's modern. And just leave the religious stuff out, that's all. And by the way, within the world of cultural Zionism, not that you need to know that, there was always a big machlokas. Should you completely turn your back on the past, have nothing from the past in it, be entirely a new culture? That's Berdichevsky. Or you do like Echad Ha'am and say, no, you can't. You know, you can't turn your back on your mother and father, but you appropriate selectively from it. So if we were sitting around in Chernowitz or in Lemberg, you know, in 1900, and drinking a glass of tea, you know, in the local coffee shop, this is what people would be hawking about, you see? Now, in the fin de siècle, which is the 30 years before the First World War, cultural Zionism and all that exercised a certain attraction to many modern Galician Jews, although it repelled others, especially when cultural Zionism adopted what I always call the totalizing political party, which is a very interesting thing. And that is, this era in European history saw the following. Started in Germany under Bismarck. The socialist parties wanted to win elections. They weren't going to win because in Europe the election was all rigged. In other words, the law was my vote counts for 4 and your vote counts for 1. I mean, you know, they really had things like that. They called them curious. And the Socialist Party saw we're not going to win today or tomorrow. And Jewish guys actually said, listen, you know, in a utopia, we'll win the next election and pass Social Security, unemployment insurance, and all the rest of it. 8-hour day, no child labor. But since it's not going to happen, what can we do in the short term? And they said like this, you know, I'm just give you a couple examples. You know, it's not fair. The rich people come summer, they send their kids away to camp. It's in the mountains. It's the Catskills, the Adirondacks, the Catoctin Mountains. They have a good old time. Our kids are stuck at home, wandering around all day long with nothing to do, no school. You know that's a recipe for disaster. They're going to run up to no damn good. That's what it is, you see? Who knows what they'll end up, who they'll meet, and all the rest of it. You want to know something? A rich camp, I'm just using figures. A rich camp costs 10 grand. I can't come up with nothing near that. Guess what? If we pass the hat among all the workers and everybody puts in a penny, and we have so many workers in the factory, we can build our own camp in the mountains and charge a nickel. You see what I'm saying? The power of the masses. The rich people can afford a fancy funeral. The poor people, they just get dumped somewhere. You want to know something? We pass the hat and we can make a socialist Saul Evanson's, you know, funeral house. We can make our own library, so it won't be books that are only interesting to the rich and the powerful and the middle class, but works like Jack London, you know, to speak to us. You see? And so on and so forth. And next thing you know, we can have on Sundays off. The rich people can go have a concert. We can't have a concert. Well, guess what? If we pass the hat, we can rent the Baltimore Symphony once in a while. We can put together a boating trip down the river, give a little bit of quality of life to the suffering masses. You see? It's not going to make everybody rich, but you can help. This is what we call the totalizing political party. So you join my party, the Social Democratic Party in Germany, or whatever it is, and you get not only union representation, or they fight for you, the Oasis, which didn't work out too well, but you get your boat trip, you get your summer camp, you get your this, that, and the other. You get your Kupat Cholim. You get your medical attention. We can't necessarily hire the best guy around, but we can get something better than the local quack. They say if we pay the guy, we put this doctor on a retainer or something like that, lawyers and so on and so forth. So meanwhile, the party is reinforcing itself because you're going to live all your life within that. Why wouldn't you? All your spare time is going to be taken up in those activities. Why not? The girl you're going to meet or whatever, vice versa, is going to be somebody from your own group. You're going to meet at some kind of a dance. See, they can make a dance. They can make social. Why not? Why not? And next thing you know, it is not what we have in America, the Democrats and Republicans, which is a different model. In this country, the political party's there for election day, and after that, almost all of it fades, except a small few. You get it? I vote, I express my opinion, but I got a life. I'm not spending around, hanging around the thing talking politics. In these environments, that's not true. The election is just one piece. You spend your whole life within that context. Boy, did this take off. Next thing you know, the Catholics said, we better imitate this. We're going to lose all our workers in Germany and France and Italy and all these other countries. And the Zionists, the cultural Zionists did this. And so if you're talking about Galicia, a place like that, have youth groups for the afternoon. Kids got nothing to do in the shtetl. You see? We got activities on the Shabbat. We got this, we got that. We got summer groups. It's not from all the rest of it. Yeah, well, that doesn't do any good. What are you offering? You're offering nothing. You get it? And that's why Zionism, as a movement, made pretty steady progress in the fin de siècle, the years up to 1914. And it makes total sense. Okay? Now, how come the Orthodox didn't do like the Catholic Church and immediately shift over? Because today you have from summer camps, yeah? You have from concerts. We've done it. They were like the deer in the headlights. We don't change. You see? Galicia especially had very strong that mentality. This is the way it was. It's not what our parents did. That's not what we do. Which was dumb, but that's how they saw it. Now, what can I tell you? That's how it goes. Now, a unique feature of Galicia was you had now Zionists running for parliamentary seats, okay? Which is kind of interesting. Look at that. That's a Jewish election rally. You understand? And for a Zionist candidate in one of the little towns, in Buchach. You've heard of Buchach. If you're in yeshiva, you heard of Buchach. The Buchach are gone. It's from Buchach, Agnon. Okay? So it's a little town. Look what they pull out everybody on election day. We don't see this in America. Long ago, before you had TV, and before you had radio, this was entertainment. Because in the United States of America, I think many will know this. There was a time before you had civil service reform. And before you had civil service reform, every time a president got elected, fired everybody. They put in even the dog catchers and the postmasters. Remember, the president of the United States appointed everybody. So everybody who wants a job and their relatives will be politically active and come out for the rallies. Okay? So here you have a Jewish party. This is, by the way, this doesn't exist in the Russian Empire. In Poland, Lithuania, there's no election. But in Austria, there's elections. Okay? And therefore, you can have Jewish parties and to have Zionist guys. Now, they could have won, except for two factors. They were not from. So the Belzer Rebbe, who had all the votes, he said, don't vote for the Zionists, vote for the Polish anti-Semite. Well, because the Zionists will try to hurt the Frum Jews. And the anti-Semite, he'll cut a deal in the back room to leave the yeshiva and the cheters alone. I'm telling you how it happened. Okay? Number two, it's also true, there was outrageous cheating by the Poles. Look at this. I want you to see it. Here's an election, early 20th century. Rohatyn, that's a town not far from Buchach. Right? We all remember Felix Rohatyn. It's a town in Galicia. Rohatyn belonged to the 29th election district, which encompassed the municipal areas of this, that, and the other. The Zionist organization district nominated the well-known guy, Dr. Rappaport, Rabbi Dr. Rappaport. So he was a rabbi. The Polish guy was Dr. Dulemba, in other words, not Jewish, who was nominated by terror, bribery, and fraud. Now, fortunately, we have nothing like this in Baltimore, Maryland. Okay. He had been representative for a district in 1902. He was backed by assimilationists, meaning the left-wing Jews, but he also received the of the court of the Belzers. I told you, because the Belzers cut a deal with him. Well, you see the same thing today in New York election with the Satmar. They'll vote for the worst candidates around, and they recently did, because they cut their own deals. Okay? Now, by the way, that was the whole business. Who was that mayor? De Blasio. Everybody's, De Blasio. Who put him in? Who put him in? You understand? Because they made a deal with him. Nobody knew the corona's coming on. You see what I'm saying? So, Hebrew representative, the Admor, the Rebbe, told his Hasidim not to vote for the Zionist, but to vote for the Pole, who, as we well know, is one of the leaders of the Index, which was the anti-Semitic party. Okay? Welcome to politics in Galicia. I'm just trying to show you how life really was. The Jewish National Committee, Bill, this is not working anymore. Yeah. He says, okay, the Jewish National Committee was headed by Dr. Katz, Fishman, Weil, etc. Right from the beginning, the Poles, now remember I told you yesterday, Franz Josef gave them the power. So they were the ones who had the governor job and what we would say today, the legislative assembly. They were in positions of power. From the beginning, the Poles, with the backing of the Austrian government, which really means with the acquiescence, not the backing, waged a tyrannical campaign that became worse on election day. The campaigners for the Polish guy were paid 5 crowns for each one. They handed out cash. You see? Well, listen, you used to have walking around money here. Okay. So wait a second. The Jews were not given ballot slips, and the head of the district, as well as the mayor, distributed ballots with the name of the guy on it, Dr. Dumba, all this with the backing of the Austrian government. So basically, they allowed outrageous things to happen. Look, it happened to the USA not that long ago, right? It just did. And, this is from 1907. You had the same thing. You heard of Tammany Hall, and we had that in Baltimore and every other urban center. And that's how it went. On election day, the cops stood in front of the election hall, and anyone who didn't present a ballot with the name Dr. Dumbo in it wasn't permitted to enter. You see? Now, despite the terror, the stealing of the ballots, and the bribe money, Dumbo was unable to get a majority in the first round, had to run again against Dr. Rappaport. In the second round, which took place on 31 May, the Ruthenians, meaning the Ukrainians, decided to vote for Rappaport. You see how the shifting alliances are? The Belzers are voting for the guy. The Ukrainians are voting for the rabbi. Okay? Well, no, because they want to stick it to the Poles. This is what we call politics, okay? Now, wait a minute. On election day, the terror was increased even more. Contrary to election laws, government officials, together with the head of the district, what we would call the governor, and the mayor openly carried out acts of bribery and deceit with threats of pogroms against the Jews. Ballots marked that Dr. Rapport were stolen from the box, and this way he lost and Dumbo was elected. The election committees protested, but to no avail. Yeah, this is what it used to be a joke in Germany, Galicianer Wahlen, Galician elections. Everybody, stuffing the ballot box, all the rest of it. Hey, Donald Trump said they did it in this election. You know what I'm saying? In other words, these charges are not unknown around the world till today. Now, whether it's true or not, I'm just saying, charges like this do happen. Okay, now, this did not inhibit the steady growth of Zionist socialist groups and parties. Their ranks were constantly being filled by the frum kids that were hemorrhaging out of the world of Orthodoxy. You see, a basic feature of this era was the constant hemorrhaging from the ranks of the frum. These were the main years of the attractiveness of European culture for the religious. We don't have that kind of thing today. There existed in the minds of many people, young people, a desire to get some kind of a secular education, in addition to not necessarily in place of a Torah education, right? Or maybe I should say, a frum non-education. Here I'm talking about something I don't think most people know, a secondary education. The primary education is an elementary school, so a secondary education is post-elementary school. It could be like in America up to 12th grade, it could be 9th grade, 10th grade, things like that. In Galicia, secondary education would be, I would guess, up to something like 10th grade, something in that area. Now, I'm referring secondary education, post-bar mitzvah education. Herein lies a tale the problem of the teenage years. You see, Galician Orthodoxy was still living in the pre-modern economic mindset. The sole institution of public education was the cheder. And the cheder was a primary school. The cheder was sacred to both the Hasidim and the Misnagdim. That's how the Sheriffs of Plato started in Baltimore, Maryland. They said TA is not good enough. They want a cheder. You know, the Jews who came here from Hungary in the 1950s and all that sort of thing. The original, there's enough tolling. Yeah. What? Yeah, but I'm saying, but we remember. Now, the cheder was the target of the maskilim. The cheder was the target of the goyim, as we shall see. It was the darling of the frum, because the cheder was associated with, I'll use the word brainwashing, heavily indoctrinating the kids into Yiddishkeit. That's well known. Now, secondary education, notice after, let's say, bar mitzvah, 12 years old, secondary education, over the centuries, was always for a few males, not for a majority. And the secondary education in the old school was Gemar, Gemar, Gemar. After all, don't forget, people in the past married at 12, 13, 14, 15. They married in their early teens. And obviously, early marriage as an institution had a powerful negative effect on secondary education. Agreed? I mean, if you're married, you ain't going to school. So early marriage is also there. The Noda B'Yehuda is famous. He writes in his introduction, he said, basically his family was millionaires. They could afford to give him they saw from young age he's going to be a Talmudic genius. They give him full-time. He said, my parents hired full-time tutors for me. I even had special tutors in Pilpul and so forth. Okay, because they could see the future. But he's not typical. You understand? Landau. He's not typical. And therefore, most kids didn't have that kind of turnout. Early marriage means you're going into business, commerce of some sort, maybe an artisan. You're certainly not furthering your school education. Okay? You get married 12, 13, 14, you're not going to go, down that road. Now, by the way, the wife, who's also 12, 13, 14, 15, is also going to be part of the business. After all, in the old days, in the old economy, before what we're talking about now, Poland was one gigantic flea market, as I told you the other day. Everybody's always handling with different stuff. And a lot of times the wife was not only a better help, she might have been better in business than him. There's a famous story. When Russia took over their part of Poland, the Russian governor came to a guy and he said, I guess, I heard you have 150 pounds of gold in your house stashed away. Where is it? He said, okay. He brought out his wife. You see him? Because she ran the business. You get it? So anyway, so that's what we're talking about. Now, this was a medieval model, an early modern model. And it made sense in those earlier centuries, as I just said. It made sense in the old kingdom of Poland when there was a dynamic economy. Okay? That's the key point I want to emphasize. When I said the whole Poland was a big flea market once upon a time, the whole Eastern Europe was the kingdom of Poland. So if I'm in Galicia, I'm trading potentially, doing deals with people all over Eastern Europe, if not elsewhere. And there were no tariffs and things like that. I mean, you paid your local nobleman off the top. That was the taxes. You get it? And there were some minimal taxes also to the king. And that's it. So basically, it's a capitalist paradise or a capitalist hell if you're not good in business. But if you're good in business, like we would say today, no regulation, no this, no that. And in that kind of environment, okay, so I'm leaving school at 12. I'm in the world of business. I'll have a couple of hard knocks for 2-3 years till I figure out what I'm doing. By the time I'm 16, 17 years old, I'm going to start to make a living. And maybe I'll do well. Or maybe I'll be lucky enough that the girl I married does well. She helps out. It's the kind of thing we see today, actually, in Baltimore, for example, where you see kids who are definitely not academic, but let's say the guy goes into real estate or home improvements or something like that, internet commerce, and they become millionaires. This is notorious. I said this in college, in Hopkins, and everybody, I said, you have kids, and I'm talking to kids in elite situations in Hopkins, and I said, you have classmates, all that, and they're never going to go to Hopkins or anything like that. They're going to make more money than you ever did. And they all said, yeah, you're right. You see? So it made sense in that way, But the reason it makes sense, my friends, is because of the dynamic nature of the American economy. We take that for granted. We live in a country of unbelievable economic opportunity, even with all the problems we have, even with the 30, 50 trillion debt, which is going crazy, But until that crashes us, you can do businesses, from Baltimore to San Francisco, It's all the same money, it's all the same economy, it's there. Now, by the way, you learn real fast. I would not advise you to invest in typewriters. No, you got to know, be on top of it. But if you're young, these guys are on top of it. And they're doing very well in Baltimore, in Lakewood, in New York, in Muncie, Chicago, around the world. They're not the guys that were the best guys in high school or in yeshiva or anything like that at all. Now remember, by the way, I want to make it clear, I'm talking about legitimate business now. There's always the illegitimate business. There's always the wire. You can that's another way of getting rich without going to college, even high school. But I'm not talking about illegitimate business. In Baltimore, it's drugs. In Galicia, the illegitimate business was prostitution. They told the white slavery. That's a dark underside, you see? But that's due to the fact, as I said before, the economy was real bad, and people were looking for ways to make money, and they went to areas in which you make money, it's just schmutzige Geld, you see? The point is that the economy was in a permanent depression. It didn't get better in the 19th century due to the Austrian economic misrule and due to the successful efforts of the Polish nobles who owned so much of land and the peasants that they want to do anything as long as they can maintain their gone-with-the-wind lifestyle. Because they really lived a plantation kind of life. And if it wasn't exactly like the South, it was very similar. You see? Therefore, they want the peasants dumb and uneducated, and they didn't want the economy too great, and they live high in the hog, as the expression goes. And that's what happened, and no one interfered with them. The permanent economic depression, however, combined with a baby boom, and of course that spelled economic disaster, right? Because there were millions for whom there were no genuine employment, so it wasn't the old kingdom of Poland where you never had that problem. You see, I can't overemphasize, if an economy doesn't have the possibilities of expanding and being dynamic in some ways, it's terrible, you choke, okay? Now, so my point is, the old model of chinuch, of education, needed some change for basic parnosa purposes. But the Galician Orthodoxy was extremely wary of, and therefore opposed to change. Old-fashioned cheder über alles. Perhaps the Misnagdim, maybe, might have come around, but not when there was such a heavy Hasidic presence that was militantly against any change and viewed as a heresy, and they would stigmatize any effort, even by the firmest guys we shall see, to bring in any kind of different model of education. Oh, you're like Avi-wise, like open Orthodox, you're beyond the pale. And this is the beginning of the end. And your grandchildren will not be Jewish. They use all this kind of language, and it would scare off those who were thinking about experimenting, trying to find something new. Now, for the tight Hasidic groups, everything was okay. Hasidism is vibrant by definition. And if they have any losses, and of course they do, they're affordable because they retain the great majority of their followers. And that's true down till today. But the Misnagdim were not vibrant because you don't have Rebbe, you don't have the whole circus, you don't have the whole show with the Tish and all the rest of it. You just have Shalosh. So it can be boring if you're not careful, you see? And so what was the result? Their losses were very great and they did not know what to do. Now here's where geography kicks in. Because there were other models out there, but they never penetrated in Galicia. If you look closely at this map, let's see if it works. Oh, good. Thank you. If you look closely at the map, this used to be all Poland where I'm doing, I hope this works. Yeah. Oh. Yeah, I need batteries, yeah. That area was the old Poland, Galicia, Central Poland, Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine. But you see, they're two different empires with borders that were not so well crossed. In Lithuania, as we all know, there did emerge in the 19th century this new model called the Lithuanian yeshiva, which, whatever you want to say about it, proved to be successful as providing a dynamic traditionalism, a dynamic element into Orthodoxy, which captured the imagination of the young, at least some. Okay? And I can tell you, by the time you get to the Siecle, you probably don't know this, the yeshiva movement was already a missionary movement. They were starting not only in Lithuania proper. Here, let's go back one. Here is Lithuania proper. Tels, Slobodka, Mir, and those kind of places. Lithuania, Russia. But by the late 1800s, early 1900s, they were already starting yeshivas here. You see? Litvish yeshivas in Volhynia, in central Poland, in places like that. It's surprising. And as we know, in the 20th century, they would go on to make yeshivas in America, in England, in Palestine, and in between the two wars in Belgium, in Germany, some other places. It's a kind of a missionary movement. I wouldn't compare it with Lubavitch, but nevertheless, it's a missionary movement. It didn't get into Galicia. It's the other country. Didn't penetrate into there. And so nobody came, which they ought to have been able to, and said, let's make now what we call a Slobodka type situation or a Volozhin type situation, let's say, for example, in Lemberg or Krakow. And therefore, one model that could have worked very well if it was given a chance, never got a chance. Didn't happen. The dynamic yeshiva didn't penetrate. As I said before, there were some attempts, I didn't say this, by the local misnagdim set up yeshivas in the late 1800s, early 1900s. They were all small, they didn't last long, they're very anemic. Even the big rabbis, the Marsham, it didn't work. Have a Galician model without the Lithuanian model with the Rosh Yeshiva and the Mashgiach and the Shmooze and all that business, it didn't work. Okay? But wait a minute. Next door is Hungary. Here's Galicia. Next door, just beyond the Carpathian Mountains, this is go back. You can stop here. There's Galicia. Here is Hungary. This is the mountain range in between them. Hungary was next door. A lot of Galicians moved to Hungary. Hungary went through a dynamic phase in the 19th century. Okay? The Hungarian Jews, this is in the Kingdom of Hungary, which no longer exists. They're pretty much broken into three groups. Now let's go to the next one. They had the Neologues, which we would call conservative and reform. You had the Misnagdim, they had the Hasidim. The Misnagdim were associated usually with the Oberland, which is the left side, the western part of Hungary. And the Hasidim usually on the opposite side, in the Unterland, in the eastern part of Hungary. Okay, those are three very distinct groups. Now, the Neologues were self-defined. It was committed to university education and to assimilation in the Magyar culture. That's who they were. The Hasidim were obviously the opposite extreme. They wanted no secular education whatsoever. The Misnagdim, the group in the middle, interestingly, were not into college, but they were bourgeois. Like I said before, the frum Jews in Baltimore. And they came to go into business after they spent a few years, let's say usually from 12 to 19, something like that, in a Hungarian yeshiva, which is a teenage institution. Because Hungary also had a very dynamic economy in the late 19th and early 20th century. Hungary, unleashed a capitalism. By the way, that's one of the reasons they gave the Jews the civil rights in 1867. It's one of the reasons they worked like a charm. Because the Hungarian economy shot through the roof, and they had pretty much a 10% growth rate, decade after decade, down to the First World War. You understand? And the Jewish businesses really flourished. So did the non-Jewish businesses. The best example is, in the beginning, foreign capital was invested in developing Hungary. By the time you get to 1910, Hungarian capital is investing in other countries. You get my point? So once again, you can have a model in which a guy goes to yeshiva, let's say till he's, 18, 19, 20, and gets married somewhere along the way, and you go into a business, it's an economy in which there are very good prospects for business if you know what you're doing. You don't necessarily need a college education to become a member of the free professions, okay? You see what I'm doing? I'm contrasting this to Galicia. Now, the system worked because of the good economy and the numerous teen yeshivas. Now, Hungary had no schooling for girls. That's just interesting. I don't know exactly how that worked out, okay? The families, there weren't many that really wanted to give the girls a frum education, would send them to Germany, like the Hirsch or something like that. You see? But nevertheless, the economic basis was there. People can make a living. I just want to make that clear, right? And then there was a third model. But the Hungarian model did not penetrate into Galicia. And the third model is Germany, which let's go to the next one. Back, stop, freeze, right? I told you, Hungary was a lot bigger then, right? Hungary was a lot bigger then and had a dynamic economy. Now don't move. Here's Galicia. Look at that, tip to tip. That's Germany already. Here's Krakow. It's actually physically very close. But the borders were borders. They're two different countries and two different realities. When you went in Germany, it was a strong, vibrant economy. Once again, Germany, Hungary, the US, these are countries which in late 19th century had very dynamic economies for various reasons. I'll say it again, this is the reason they gave the Jews the civil rights. They didn't love the Jews, but they said if we want the economy to take off, you just got to get them out of the way. You understand? There was even a joke that, a Jewish company, there was a company, Conan Hess, and they bought everything. And the Hungarians said bitterly with the joke, on the border is a sign, Conan Hess, formerly Hungary. They bought the whole country. You see? So, okay. So in terms of chinuch and education, let's go to the next one. Here you had the model of what we call Term Derech Eretz, or Neo-Orthodoxy. Okay? Now, wait a second. This, too, turned out to be German-specific. It didn't spread in the 19th century to Austria-Hungary. It didn't spread to France and these other countries. It had to have this national stuff characteristic going on there. It worked for the Yekes when it worked. You see? And it just didn't spill over, which is just interesting. Okay? Now, in Neo-Orthodoxy, what I'm talking about, there was a greater embrace of the bourgeois lifestyle. You dress European, you act European, you go on your vacations, you do all this stuff. With the innovation of day schools, in which you had both Hebrew and English, or Hebrew and German studies in the same day school, at the elementary level. So those are efficient, not a cheder, efficient day schools, subject to the Board of Education, meet all the rules, but you have, as we call in this country, half-day secular, half-day Hebrew, with some system of from secondary education as well. Samson Raphael Hirsch made it his business to have a secondary school, a high school, which is extremely unusual. In fact, if you're a real Hirschian, you'll know he built the high school before he built the elementary school. Because he said the most important years of grabbing someone's mind, the teen years, which is true. It's kind of a waste of time to send your kids to the most religious school in the world and then public school after 6th grade or 7th grade or 8th grade. Would you agree with that statement? It's pretty much the way it goes. There's exceptions all the time, but generally speaking. On the other hand, suppose you get a kid who went to public school, but then switches to from school at the 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade. You see what I mean? Now, but it was rare. Elsewhere, what you had in Germany was more of an afternoon Talmud Torah high school level. But they took it seriously. Most innovatively, the Neo-Orthodox actually went so far as to develop formal Judaic schooling for girls. Though not with too much Hebrew text. It was more like Chumash with Hirsch. No, I'm very serious. You know what I'm saying? They're mostly in German and that sort of thing. Pirkei Avos with Hirsch. That kind of business. But it worked. The most important point is like this. It worked. People felt good about being Jewish. They felt enthusiastic about keeping the mitzvahs when they grow up and develop families. It worked. Now, the Iker, of course, as we know today, this is the insight of people like Hirsch and Hildesheimer was, it doesn't really matter that much what the quality of education you're offering in the school. It's the saviva. It's the social environment. The fact that the kid goes to a school, he or she, in which there's no school on Saturday, there's no school on Rosh Hashanah, you don't have to worry about all that, questions of writing. You have your friends are all Jewish. The Jewish holidays are celebrated, even Lag BaOmer. It's a Jewish environment. Friday, everybody's getting ready for Shabbos. If you have a little bit of brains, you have some weekend activities. It's the social part that socializes the person, male or female, into wanting to stay within the frum community when they grow up and get married and they're on their own. Okay? Because I can tell you right now, the curriculum was not, was not yeshivish at all. It was Hirschian maskilic. Hirsch was a kind of a maskil. Although people get angry, I said, I don't mean the non-from kind, of course. But Hirsch has very maskilic aspects to him. And the hours of Limud Kodesh in Germany were very reduced. That's how it went. It don't matter. When I say it doesn't matter, if you really have intellectual goals and you think in that heuristic way, so then you don't like it. But if your goal is, as is the case with most people and most parents, I would like my kid to become the next Vilna Gaon. But short of that, I would like him, for example, let's talk about him. I'd like him to grow up and marry a Jewish girl and raise a Jewish family. You understand? I would like my daughter to marry a Jewish guy and have Shabbos and raise a Jewish family. More is better, but at least that. This was the mentality of the Bush. I think it still is. Now, Hirsch himself did not encourage college. This will surprise people. Matter of fact, his day school was not a college prep day school. It's not a gymnasium at all. This was called Realschule, which basically meant they teach you business, math, bookkeeping, and that kind of stuff to get you ready for world of business. It's up to 10th grade, okay? And the idea was, they don't need college. How old are you at the 10th grade? 15, 16? You get out of school, you'll apprentice yourself to some other existing business, you learn the ropes. 4 or 5 years, you learn the ropes, you can go out on your own. Give it another 4 or 5 years, and then you get married, because you can't get married before. This is bourgeois Europe. You can't get married until you have enough money to support a wife. Because in the bourgeois world, she's not working. You understand? And that was their system, the way they worked it out over there. Again, I want to emphasize, Germany had, let's go to the next one. Germany had a dynamic economy, and you could do this. So a boy, let's say, for example, could go up to 10th grade, and then by the time he's 25 or something like that, has a business, whatever it is. And in the German economy, I think you know this. I mean, the German economy, even today, is tremendous. The Kaiser's time, they were selling all over the world. You see, so you could make a living that way, and a nice living too, if you know what you're doing. Nice living. By the fin de siècle, though, the second generation started going to university, because it's always that way. The parents are good in business. The next generation is like, I want to be a professor of Renaissance studies. You know, like Harry Weinberg's son. Remember that? Now, the key point in all this was the provision of both Jewish and secular studies in a Jewish school for boys and girls. This, of course, connoted a legitimation of secular subjects, which was a formal break with cultural insularity, with its principled rejection of secular studies. It's involved a certain embrace of a form of Haskalah, the frum one, of Hirsch and Hildesheimer. I'm just trying to say, if you're a Galician, especially a Chassid, but even regular Galician from, that's too left-wing for me. That's too left-wing for me. Too sharp of a break for the past. To the Galicians, the frum Tom Derech Eretz types were weirdos. Okay, works in Germany. Okay, he's a Shomer Shabbos. She was a Siecle. I don't know how they did it, but it ain't for us. I don't judge another country, but not over here. And Hirsch had to be respected. He was operating in a world of b'diavad. It was like a hurrah shah. They said it was an emergency situation. It could never be accepted in Kalitzi as a lachatchila, they said. After Misnagdim felt that way, imagine the Hasidim. And so this is why the Orthodox had problems. Mind you, to the Germans, to the Yakis, the Hirschians, this was not, the whole term Derech Eretz is not a b'diavad, it's a lachatchila. They think it's the ideal way to go. I might say that they felt it should be adopted throughout the world. Okay? It should be adopted everywhere. Fine-tuned for local circumstances. But it was an ideal model. Here's Selig Shachnowitz, who was a Litvak, who moved to Germany. He used to write all these novels. The Eastern European Jew comes to Germany, and he sees the ideal world. Everybody is Shomer Shabbos, but they're rich by Eastern European standards. They live in nice houses. They dress well. The women are fancy. The girls go to shul on Friday night, which never happened in Eastern Europe. The education, it's like a perfect world. You see? And that reflects the fact that he bought the Kool-Aid, He said, this is it. That's what the Germans wanted for everybody. But the Eastern European Jews didn't see it that way. Even the Litvaks said, let's go to the next one, Baruch Ber Leibowitz. He said, term derech is not for us. The famous passage, the big Rosh Hashiva said, listen, Germany, they had no choice, whatever. Like I say, it's they're desperate situations, so we have to give up Hirsch a pat on the back, but it ain't for us. You see? And by the way, that's the Haredi attitude today. Right? Same story of Hirsch, very highest, See, but it's not for us. There was a special circumstance for that time. So it came down in Galicia to a defense of the status quo, which is the cheder. No other institution they held was reliable. But in the last 3 decades of the 19th century and in the fin de Siecle, the cheder suffered from a number of deficiencies, 3 big ones. First of all, hygiene. I don't think I even have to describe that. Right? The guy, there's no regulations. Anybody can teach in whatever room in their house. How many kids are running around? I won't get more detailed than that, but you know. And the government actually, in 1868, started cracking down, and they sent inspectors to try to fix the hygiene in the schools, at least at some minimal level. That's number one. Number two, there were 0 secular studies, as I told you, neither math and science nor liberal arts. In other words, at an elementary level, at a time when many young people started to want to acquire this. Number 3, there was no education for girls, and here we have a really weird story, a very weird story, because the Talmudic tradition, which is not unified but was viewed as unified, sends out funny messages. I'll tell you what I mean. Everyone's heard of this, that Rav Lezer says whoever teaches his daughter Torah is like teaching her foolishness, because she'll misuse it. That's a famous teaching in the Mishnah, I think, where it says you shouldn't teach girls Torah. Hold on, let me finish. Here's from the Yerushalmi. Rabbi Avo, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Avo was the big Rosh Yeshiva in Caesarea. Caesarea was the Roman city in Palestine. It's like Vegas, you understand? So he grew up in that place. He quoted the famous Rabbi Yochanan, who was a big authority, Mutter l'adam la'amdas b'to Yavonis, Misha tachshit lo. You could give your daughter a Greek education, because the knowledge of Greek, or as we would say today, Greek culture, you know, philosophy and that kind of stuff, is an ornament. It's a plus. When I was a kid, you said, she went to Goucher. You see? That kind of thing. Okay? Now, wait a minute. Another rabbi got very angry. And he said, you're lying. Shama, Rav Shimon v'Yomer, begin to boy, because you want to teach your daughter Greek, you blame it on Rabbi Yochanan. In other words, you just made this up. The great Rabbi Rabbi Yochanan would never say something as radical as that. And he replied, I swear that I heard it from Rabbi Yochanan. Right? So what do you have the 2 messages? Secular education, okay. Jewish education is not okay. Whoa. Doesn't make any sense. You see? I'm just sharing with you, these are old, this didn't start in Galicia. These are old ideas that have been there in the sub part of the culture, the subconscious, as you say, for many, many centuries. You see? And so around 1870 to 1939, the state started mandating elementary public schooling and gently sought to eliminate the cheders, the Austrians I'm talking about. The Poles were tougher. The Austrians would always say, no, close it down already, and the Hasidim would say, mañana, you know. Starting with regulating hygiene, they never actually closed them down. Indeed, this was a major plank in the from voting for the Polish candidates. Like this, I told you before, why did the Belzer Rebbe say vote for the anti-Semite? Because he's not going to bother the cheders. You see? That's the point. Now, the masses out there did not send the boys to public schools. They sent them to cheders. This changed little by little, and more people, especially after the First World War, started going to public school, but the general trend was not that way. On the other hand, the masses, and I'm talking about Hasidim, as well as others, did send their daughters to elementary public schools, even as they provided them with no cheders. Well, you obviously had all kinds of results. First of all, the girls fell in love with Polish culture and fell out of love with Jewish culture. It's only natural, right? Here she is, 1st grade, 2nd grade, 5th grade. She's learning all the Polish stuff. Polish culture is actually very impressive. It's not in this country to make fun of the Polacks, the jokes, and all the rest of it. That's funny, you know, because the ones who moved here worked in Pittsburgh and the steel mills. And all that. Over there, you have big intellectuals. It's not true. It's a very rich culture. And so a girl, when she goes to school, that's the best part of her day. She comes home, it's a drudgery. So you fall in love with the Polish stuff, you fall out of love with the Jewish stuff. It's completely understandable. Secondly, the smart girls, and there are smart girls, they're going to want to continue to high school. And that really started freaking out the Hasidic parents. Usually the mothers, by the way. It's interesting. The mothers, the ones that put up a big fight. And it led to raging civil wars in thousands of Jewish families. There's so many books and articles about this in the late 19th, early 20th century. It's ridiculous. In Hasidic families, the parents sought to kill her plans by marrying her off very young to some Chassid who by that time was repulsive to her, and she did not want the Hasidic female lifestyle. I mean, she's already 12, 13, 14 years old. She's seen the glamorous life of the West. She don't want to shave her head on and get married. And second of all, who's she going to marry? A Hasidic guy, no education whatsoever. You see, the parents just didn't think. You're raising one this way, you're raising one this way. Where's your common sense? Remember, the girl in the chassid she's going to marry, and they're teenagers, had very different educations. So husband and wife, and it happens so often, you're physically close because you're married, but they're mentally apart. You get it? In other words, they go ahead, they get married at 14 or 15, because they listen to the parents. And let's say they stay married. Most people stay married. But you get what I'm saying? Mentally, emotionally, she's here, she's there. There are marriages like that, but that's not a good. Okay? And the result was Galicia was full of terrible marriages that lasted a long time. We have over and over again the writings of the women. They say like this, he has my body, but he does not have my heart. You see? Now, one of the victims of the bad marriage, one of them, was Sarah Schneer. She's born in Krakow, 1883. So no, she exactly grows up at the time we're talking about, in the fin de Siecle. Exactly what I'm talking about. She went to public school. Her parents were Belzer Hasidim. They live in Krakow, which is a big city. You ain't giving a girl a little cheder education. God forbid she should teach her Torah. Therefore, you send her to public school. She was smart and very Jewish. Her teva happened to be a very frum. That's just who she was. Not everybody's like that. She liked the Hasidic lifestyle. She liked all the frum stuff, but she's yearning for knowledge. And she has friends, and they go to Polish libraries. They go to Polish reading societies. They even take her once in a while, like we would say today, to the movies, to plays, and she'll write in her diary, I went to a place very interesting, but I really shouldn't have seen it. And by the way, compared to today, it's G plus, But at that time, it's like triple X, by that time. And, but you get what I'm saying? Notice, just instinctually. Now, she got straight A's. By the way, she kept diaries in Yiddish and in Polish, which are now being translated. And obviously, the Polish stuff she didn't want the parents to read. Now, because her parents couldn't speak Yiddish. You get it. Now, by the way, there's nothing scandalous. I just want to make clear. You're not going to find any scandals over here. We're not talking Bill Clinton or anything like that. It's like my uncle didn't see, But nevertheless, she doesn't like the system. Okay? Now, she would never, ever say that. And she's a very loyal girl. And she loves the Yiddishkeit. And it bothers her that I went to a great Polish thing. How come we don't have something Jewish like that? I went to a very interesting lecture. How come we don't have anything Jewish like that? And the stuff I heard there was very interesting, but very not Yiddish. It's not right. You see? Now, how come she has, when I have religion classes in school, because in Austria-Hungary, one of the classes you take is religion. The Catholics get a priest to come in to do something. The Jews get a rabbi to come and do something. And the teacher asks the girls questions about basic Judaism. They don't know anything. And they say, what's wrong with you? And she, of course, always knew, because she just happened to be like that. But, she feels so ashamed. It's very, very interesting. Well, when she finishes primary school, I guess 6th grade, 7th grade, whatever it is, she really fought with her parents. She wanted to go to high school. And I think they really didn't want to because they're Belzer Hasidim. And I think they gave her like a year or two maybe. And then they married her off. And she was not in love with the guy. It was a terrible marriage and eventually got divorced. And her name's Landau. It's not what she wanted. But she was a good girl. And if the parents said to do this, she did it. And it's like I said before. Now, it's a perfect example I'm talking about. It happens to be in her case, she didn't react to it, as some did by running away to America or converting. There's a few that ran away to the convent and this and that and the other. The book about it, But, but on the other hand, like I said before, he does not have my heart. The parents did the best thing they saw for her, because the guy she married owned property, so he was what we call today, by the standards of that class, well off. So they thought, listen, I'm doing you a favor, marrying with somebody with money. It's not who, there's no date. It's not somebody she wanted, you see? And so I'm simply saying that even somebody like Sarah Schneer is a victim of this situation. Even when they stay in the fold, you can imagine how they feel for the rest of their lives. So you have tons of women who are going to grow up and going to pass all this negativity down to their children about Judaism. That's a very interesting aspect of people growing up in the period just before the Shoah in Europe. These education, I'm not talking about the few who converted, by the way. I'm talking about, there is, let's put it this way, go to the next one. There is a world of the prostitution that's been written about, and there's a world now, Professor Mannequin just wrote a very good book about the rebellious daughters, the girls who ran away to the convent. You understand? And so forth. But it's a small number. There were some big, high-profile cases and all that. If I wanted to regale you, I could go into that now, but I don't have time. I'm late as it is. And so, basically, where I'm going with this is that these education problems were known and frequently discussed in all kinds of forums, but the traditionalists were lockjawed, even when their own daughters' lack of knowledge in Judaism exposed them to ridicule in the public schools, in the compulsory religious classes in the public schools. There was a guy who converted to Hasidism from being a Yekis. He had a PhD. And he used to write him all these questions. What do I do my daughter in school, all the rest of it? And he was already committed to Hasidism. So he said, listen, just make the best of it. They were Marcus. So no, there was no good answer. They couldn't accept the obvious solution of Hersheyism, right? In which you have, in a frum environment, you get both. And I want to repeat, it was not a question of teaching them Gemara or anything like that. It's very little content. But it's Jewish and it's enthusiastic and it's Yiddish. And you come home feeling good about who you are. And that's so important. They couldn't accept the obvious solution of term derech eretz any more than the Haredim of Israel today could accept the Neri Israel Mechina or Shlangers, because they got English. And so this is the father of Leo Young. Remember him in New York? Rabbi Leo Young? So his father was a real frum guy, as you can see over there. He had a PhD, and he came to Krakow. He wanted to open a boys' school and a girls' school, like we say today, like TA, maybe even to the right of TA. And the idea is you'll have Limudi Kodesh and Limudi Chol. And believe you me, in Krakow you'd have more than a little bit of Limudi Kodesh. He was a genuinely frum guy, okay? They ran him out of town. It's like X-rated, like you're a reform rabbi. You get it? They made it impossible for him, so he went to London. By the standards of London, he was on the extreme right. You see? So I'm just trying to tell you, and he wrote to them, he said, don't you see what's happening in front of your own eyes? They didn't want to hear that. They didn't want to hear that, okay? On the other hand, remember, the system did work for many, and so it did. So Yiddishkeit in Galicia in the period of time was very varied and was complex. The Poles who governed Galicia always were debating among themselves the Cheder question. The Poles, should we close it or not? On the one hand, it's a state within a state, which is true, therefore was offensive to the Poles. On the other hand, they said like this, if you close down the Cheders, the Yids will flood the public schools. We don't want that. You get it? So better keep them over there. And so this is how the universities, by the way, the Jews will flood the universities. And then next thing you know, they'll take over the civil service. And next thing you know, they'll take over the free professions. Because if the civil service test, whoever gets the highest grade gets the job, guess what? The Polish are going to come in second. You understand? No, so they said, this is Jabotinsky's famous word. He says, I don't blame the Poles for being anti-Semitic. So he said, it's objective anti-Semitism, the anti-Semitism things. If they leave a clean playing field, the Jews will mop up. And it's not the Jews' country, it's the Polish country. I don't want to play football if I'm not good at football. I'd rather play baseball. It's not fun for me to play football if I always lose at football. I'm sick and tired of that. I don't want to play football. So they say, I don't want a clean playing field with meritocracy, all the rest of it, if we're up against the Jews because we're going to lose all the time. I don't want that system. I don't want to play a game I lose. On the other hand, the Austrian government, the federal authorities, as I told you yesterday, with all their patience, were moving in on the Cheders little by little. This was the situation on the eve of World War II. The Austrian government was finally saying, listen, we don't want to do it, but pretty soon we're going to close down these places unless you fix them. But that means they held out to the end of Austria, okay, because the war broke out. The traditionalists couldn't change. The system did work for many, and the problems did not go away. Now you understand the background of Sarah Schneer, a pre-war Krakow, who lived not far geographically from Germany, because I told you before, here's Krakow and here's already Silesia, here's Germany. But nevertheless, she lived physically close to Germany, but mentally far away, culturally far away, who did not encounter neo-Orthodoxy with its Western respect for women until circumstances compelled her to run away during World War I from Galicia to Vienna, and then end up davening serendipitously in a Hirschian synagogue, where they had one of the Hirschian followers, and he used to give big speeches like Hirsch on the exalted position of the Jewish women. Devorah, Yael, Sari Meno, people like that, Yehudis, and she basically said, wow, this is amazing. And so the effects of that experience we'll deal with tomorrow. But even after she set up the Beis Yaakov network and got it backed by the Aguda, which in Poland was the Ger, I just want to make it clear the Galician Hasidim, especially in Belz and Sons, opposed it. Okay? But that's for our last lecture. So with that, I'll bid you good night.